Jessica, please call roll.
Ashley Hartmeyer-Prick.
Here.
Tia Ping.
Here.
Heidi Edwards.
Here.
Wendy Kroger.
Here.
Felicita Monteblanco.
Here.
Thank you. So our first action item today for our work session is an SDC discussion on affordable housing, level of service, and unit cost. Handing it over to Janine and Deb.
Thank you.
Right.
Oh,
You've got
Doug,
the show,
you wanna?
No, all yours.
Okay, are you seeing the PowerPoint presentation? Great, wonderful. So we have a lot to cover tonight. So to start, I want to thank the board for their careful reading of the package and the thoughtful questions that were submitted. I think that's going to help this go a lot smoother and hopefully less painful. So knowing how much we have to cover, I want to suggest we all take a nice big deep breath. And then we can dive right in. So we'll start this evening off with a brief presentation from Deb Gallardi, our amazing consultant, on her team's work on level of service and unit cost. We're then going to move into the questions, and we provided those to you in your packet with what I call your play sheet, where you have the questions and our recommendations. The items we're looking for input from the board on are whether we should phase in the non-residential cost over 2 years. The next one is on level of service, that is what to fund in the SDC calculation. As a reminder, we will keep all of the projects on that 20-year project list. It's a question of how much of the recreation aquatic centers we should fund through the SDCs. Then finally, for the big one, we are seeking guidance on affordable housing waivers to go into the policy we would like to bring to you early fall. I want to preface this discussion to say that staff has heard the board concerns. We've heard you that the board wants to be part of the region-wide effort in solving the need for affordable housing. We've also heard your concerns of making sure we can still deliver the service and amenities that our patrons love and have come to expect. We've tried to deliver recommendations that meet both sets of concerns. We have also presented recommendations that are sensitive to the current economic climate we find ourselves in due to the ongoing pandemic. The input we received from you today will go into the final recommendations and the final methodology report. We'll have more on the next steps at the end of this presentation. Before I turn it over to Deb, I do want to read a letter that we received from Venture Properties. It's dated July 20th, 2020, and it says, "Dear President Monteblanco," what might have been true when they were thinking of the letter, and Board of Directors. This is a follow-up letter to one we sent last month regarding SDC studies currently underway. I am writing on behalf of our land development company, Venture Properties, Inc., and its related home building company, Stonebridge Homes Northwest, LLC. We have developed new detached housing subdivisions throughout the Portland metro area, including within the service area of Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District. Along with others in our industry, we are concerned about the region's challenge in providing housing access and affordability for everyone. While recognizing the importance of SDCs for funding public improvements and services, we also see the necessity of finding a balance between SDC rates and the direct impact these fees have on the cost of delivering new homes. Here are our comments regarding the above referenced July 10, 2020 memo. 1, non-residential SDC increases. This issue was evaluated thoroughly by your consultant team as presented in the June 17, 2020 level of service and unit cost technical memorandum. We support both the new non-residential SDC rate and recommended 2-year phase-in plan recommended in attachment 1 of the July 10 memo. 2, recreation aquatic center financing percentages. We appreciate your team considering potential for controlling SDC unit costs by evaluating alternative financing scenarios for the proposed recreation aquatic centers. The June 17 memo presented two scenarios for recreation center financing, one based on 100% SDC funding and one based on 30% SDC funding, with a balance raised through a bond issue. Under 100% SDC financing, the largest single-family home category would see a 35% increase in SDC rates. The 30% quote down payment alternative as part of new bond issuance could significantly reduce this outlay, effectively lowering the SDC increase for the single-family home category to only 2%, roughly the same as current inflation in the U.S. economy. However, even though your projections show going below the 30% scenario would continue to lower the associated SDC rate with positive effect on home affordability, the conclusion recommends staying at the 30% rate. No specific rationale is provided for not going to 25 or 10% scenarios, which could achieve even smaller increases or even lowering of SDC from the current residential rate. We strongly encourage you to continue to study the alternate 10 to 25% scenarios, as well as a multi-year phase-in for any increases to slow the impact of these fees on district housing costs. 3, affordable housing waivers. Washington County's 12,000 unit shortfall of affordable housing for families earning less than 50% of area median income strongly suggests prioritizing waivers for all 30% MFI housing. We support the recommendation for 100% waiver on 30% MFI housing with case-by-case board discretion on waivers on 60% MFI housing. Thank you for your considering our comments. We look forward to continuing to work together with your organization and other stakeholders on this important proposal. Respectfully, Kelly Ritz, President. So with that, I will now turn it over to Deb to give an overview of her work. We understand that some of what Deb will present today is very technical, so we'll leave room for questions from the board before we start to address the issues presented for feedback. So Deb. Are you there, Deb?
I had to unmute. My apologies.
Thank you.
Good evening. Yeah, so we have the preliminary findings for you. And as we've talked about, I think before, it's a pretty basic math that goes into determining the SDC. The basic SDC is we take the project costs and we divide it by the number of persons, because people are what cause impact on parks and how we are serving the community. Of course, the devil's in the detail. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see what some of that detail looks like. Can we advance the slide?
Yeah. Having technical difficulties here. Hold on. Sorry about that.
There we go. So this shows some of the key elements of the methodology and how it aligns with some of the policy choices that are in front of you. So the first part is that cost basis, the total cost we're trying to recover from the SDCs. One of the big components, technical components of that, is how much of the project list cost is associated with serving growth versus existing development. And that's really where the level of service analysis comes into play. One of the policy questions is that funding for the rec center development and how much you're going to recover through the SDCs versus other mechanisms. The next part is the unit costs, and that then we determine how much of the growth cost is going to be recovered from residential development versus non-residential. As you saw in the memo, the updated data supports a higher allocation to non-residential development than currently. So you have some policy choices with how to phase that in potentially. And then finally is the assessment of the SDCs to residential and non-residential. We've already talked about the new rate structure for the tiering based on house size for a single family. And then for non-residential, we estimate, we determine a cost per employee, and then there are some options then how to assess on new non-residential development what types of categories we're going to use to estimate the number of employees for different types of development. And then finally, a big policy question is the affordable housing waivers. Next slide, please. So the numbers, there are a lot of numbers in both the memo and in the presentation. I'll just touch on some of the key information, but understand that it's still draft until we publish the report. One of the key things that you don't see in the final results yet are the compliance costs, some of the adjustments, like the administrative costs and costs of compliance. But we're likely within 5% or so of the ultimate number. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a snapshot of the project list as formatted for development of SDCs. One of the things to notice is just the total cost. We've got about a $500 million project list. We break apart development from acquisition because we evaluate level of service differently for acquisition and development. At any given time, you likely have more land that is yet to be developed than you have totally developed park acreage. And so it's important to consider the different level of service for both total land as well as developed land. So we start with this $500 million project list, and then we go through a process to determine how much of that is future growth versus existing development. We get into that in the next slide, please. So the heart of that allocation is this level of service analysis. Level of service is basically for the existing, it's the existing number of units divided by the population served. And so for parks, that's acreage, and for trails, it's miles, etc. Future is what we are adding. Take the existing and we add the project list acreage and other units, and we divide by that future population served. That is our standard that we are building and planning towards. That is the number that determines how much of the project list costs are attributable to future growth. Next slide, please. One of the important considerations is how that the existing level of service compares to the future level of service. Because if we're increasing the level of service, meaning we're adding more units per new person than we are currently serving, then some of that increase in the level of service and the standard is attributable to existing development, because they will benefit from, having more miles of trails or greater square footage for recreation centers, for example. So this relative difference between the existing level of service and the future gives you some indication as to whether projects on the project list are going to be 100% growth or something less. And so 2 examples here, trails where you are increasing significantly the future level of service by adding more mileage relative to the population that you'll be adding. Here we have some shared responsibility for those additional investments. Whereas for neighborhood park development, you can see on the right-hand side that the current level of service is actually slightly higher than the future level of service. So really, you're just adding new developed parkland to keep pace with that additional growth. And so 100% of that may be allocated to future development. Next slide, please. So this then shows you when we do that level of service analysis for each park type and looking at acquisition versus development, how those growth share percentages what the result is. And you can see that for, as I mentioned, for acquisition, most of the park types, 100% of the new acquisition is needed for growth. And in terms of development, there are a number of park types that, like neighborhood parks, you're just keeping pace with the current level of service, but there are others like community parks and trails and rec centers where you're increasing the level of service, and so there is an allocation to existing development that you need to fund through other sources. The total project, the total growth cost is about 400,000 out of that 500,000 total project list. Next slide, please. Equivalent population is just how we look at determining what portion of the cost should be paid by residential development versus non-residential development. And as I mentioned, when we update the employment figures, as well as looking at what portion of workers come from inside versus outside the district, which is the same methodology as the current rates and methodology, but the new data suggests a higher percent allocation to non-residential development. So it's close to 9%. Currently, it's more around 5%. So a significant increase. Next slide, please. The preliminary unit costs then are shown in this table. You'll notice that first for the district-wide, as we talked about, we've got both the cost per person for residential we've got two columns. One is the cost per unit with recreation centers being fully funded. That's the 5,277. And then the discounted cost per unit, which is based on 30% funding for the recreation center development. Non-residential would be 755 per employee under the full funding, and then 535 under the discounted approach. Only one benefit area is recommended in the updated methodology, and that's North Bethany. Looking at the cost differentials for the other current benefit areas, we felt that there was not justification for continuing those other benefit areas, but for North Bethany, there certainly was.
And just for the board, and that's based on land values. We have seen the land values in North Bethany substantially increase from the current methodology, but we haven't seen the land values as high as we had predicted in Bonnie Slope West or South Cooper Mountain.
And just to note that the rec centers are included in the district-wide, and so that's why you don't see a difference in the North Bethany area SDC under the two different scenarios. Okay, next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Janine here to begin discussion of some of the questions.
Actually, before we start on the questions, I want to ask if the board has any questions for you on level of service or anything that was covered, because again, this is very weighty material. And thank you for breaking it down. It's very helpful.
Thanks, Janine. It looks like Felicita would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Deb. I appreciate this so much, and every time I review it, I understand it in a deeper way. And so if you could do me a favor, can you go back to the last slide you're just on? I just want to make sure I understand. With the North Bethany, the 820. So I just want to make sure, are we saying that North Bethany SDCs will cover 100% of a potential rec aquatic? Is that what we're saying?
No, that the rec aquatic center is included in the district-wide cost. And so the North Bethany overlay supplemental SDC is only to cover the additional land and development costs of parks specific to North Bethany. And since the rec centers are district-wide, they're covered under the base district-wide SDC, which everybody pays, including North Bethany. But there's no differential. There's no basis for charging more or less to residents in North Bethany for recreation centers. That's why there's no, under the two scenarios where the only thing changing between this first column cost per unit and the discounted cost per unit is that the rec center cost is less in the discounted. And so the citywide or the district-wide SDCs go down, but the benefit area for North Bethany would not be impacted by how you fund rec centers.
Okay, thank you.
Wendy? Wendy, can you unmute?
Sorry, now I get to unmute. I'm not on my phone anymore. Sorry. I wanted to thank Deb and Janine. Every time we hear something like Felicita says, I learn something and I appreciate it. I had a question with regard to the rec centers and a question with regard to overlay. One has to do with, I was just curious, when we're looking at the potential of rec centers in like Northwest and Southwest, Northwest or Northeast and Southwest. Have you noticed any difference? For example, is almost all of the capacity, do we need to aim that for growth in the North and there's more already current people here in the Southwest? I guess what I'm looking at is SDCs pay for growth. Is there more potential for growth in the Northwest than anywhere else? And should we maybe consider looking at that a little differently? That was one question. And the second one has to do with the overlays. Right now, apparently, land value is higher in the North Bethany area, but not in the other areas we assumed. Therefore, is there any reason to consider a trigger should things change rather than just saying, nope, we're only going to do one? Is there any way to put a trigger in there in case things change? So thank you for those.
I will take the second question first and then let Deb take a first stab at the first question. With regard to land values, remember we do an annual adjustment that looks at land values on vacant residential land for the county in our district, as well as cost of constructions. So we do an annual adjustment, and that adjustment can go up or down. If we're in a boom cycle, it results in an increase. In the past, we have actually decreased our SDCs based on that annual adjustment. If we saw something that was entirely unpredicted, we always have the option of redoing the methodology, but it's still playing catch up.
Do you want me to address the second or the first question?
Yes, please.
So I think I understood the question in terms of, potentially evaluating recreation center SDCs based on area or different rates of growth within the area. If we need to unpack that a little more, we can discuss. But with respect to major facilities, while the district plans to have access to different facilities in different parts of the service area, the way we recover the costs is on a district-wide basis. And so, at any given point in time, you may be acquiring and building land and facilities in one part of the district, and the next update, maybe it's in another part of the district. But the assumption is the cost per unit doesn't differ between those areas, like land costs for some of these smaller neighborhood or community parks. And so it's most equitable, and I think in terms of just defensible to recover those costs on a district-wide basis.
Wendy, does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I had forgotten that we do look at that annually. And it does make sense, Deb, that you explain it. Rec centers obviously serve the entire district, and we should pay for it in that vein. So yes, thank you very much.
Great.
Tia?
Sorry. So if we can go back to that slide that Felicia was referencing for her question. Yeah, I just wanted to double check. So if for the, just so I 100% understand it, that North Bethany, SEC and North Bethany would essentially be, if we did the discounted rate, the 4272 plus the 820. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's their SDC. Okay. And then I wanted to, the non-residential, that since it's increasing so much, it's increasing because of our reevaluation of the study and increasing that person per 1,000 square feet. It's not that we're just like increasing a percent to increase their percentage of the SDC. Oh, right. That makes sense.
It's based on the updating. It's the same approach as what's used in the current methodology, but updating all the information that goes into the calculations, which is basically employment data and looking at inflow of employees into the district and outflow of employees out of the district, because the non-residential charge recovers the costs associated with employees that come into the district and have an opportunity to utilize park facilities as part of their working day, or even sometimes getting to work. So yeah, it's just, it is based on employment data, and that comes out of the US Census.
Okay, and then this is just to make sure the non-residential, it's just like a one-time, like they're building a non-residential building. It's like a one-time fee, right? Like it's not, yeah, okay.
Exactly.
And then I wanted to double check. I thought I saw something mentioned about that we were gonna get Beaverton Chamber of Commerce's input on that, but I don't know if I missed it, but I couldn't find it in the, did we get a response from them?
I have not, and I have it on my list to call Lorraine Clarno, their executive director, before the August hearing, and actually before our staff report is submitted for the August hearing. Perfect.
My last question is, as far as the Rec Aquatic, if we were to go for that 30%, how much of that is used for acquisition, or I guess what's the normal acquisition price versus the development part?
What we have in the project list right now is the need to acquire land in the north, for the north one. And I believe we have 9.8 million in the project list. So almost 10 million of the roughly 130 million cut. It's 60 million per rec center for construction, then add 10 million in the north for acquisition.
Okay.
Is that?
And yeah, and then in the past, because I know in the past we haven't fully funded our Rec Aquatics, we have always used a bond to supplement it. So I guess how much in the past of the SECs have we used towards a Rec Aquatic versus fulfilling it with a bond?
That I'm not sure of. What I do know is, based on work that's been done throughout the region, it can be very difficult to fully fund a Rec Aquatic center through a bond measure. And of course, if we go out for another bond, we do a lot of polling. We take the temperature of our constituents to see what they're willing to pay for that way. Thus leaving it at 30%, because maybe it's bond, maybe it's some grant revenues, maybe it's looking more creatively at these centers. If you look nationwide, at times they combine it with health services or maybe a library. So really thinking outside the box as we go forward, because these, as you see, it's, I think, a little over a quarter of the total project list, the cost of these. So they're a heavy lift.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Heidi?
I see that Doug had his hand raised, and I'm wondering if he might want to piggyback on what Tia was asking, because I had the same question as Tia with respect to bond and SDC for rec centers. And I do have another question, but Doug, maybe I'll defer to Doug real quick.
Sure, sure. One of the joys of having the color of my hair is there is a little history. So it's an interesting question because the timing, we actually built Conestoga, which would be the example of a rec aquatic, and we purchased the land in advance of the bond measure that built it. And SDCs were not engaged in the park district till 1998. So it's fair to say that the Conestoga facility was completely built by bond-related funds or general fund capital because we had no SDCs at that time.
Thank you, Doug.
You bet.
Thank you for that clarification, because I was curious about that, as Tia asked also. And just to the point with respect to the non-residential, those numbers coming from the U.S. Census, was that the 2010 census then, I assume?
It's actually comes from the American Community Survey, which is another data set that is updated more frequently. It's a sampling of information, and so it's actually, I think the most recent of that was 2017. So
okay.
It's not yeah, it's more recent than 2010.
I'm curious how accurate that is with respect to lapse in time too. So okay. Thank you.
It's within a few years, so I think it's within the standard of what we use to apply it to these calculations.
Great, thank you. Those were my questions.
Felicita?
Thank you. One, I appreciate what Janine was saying about creativity for a future rec aquatic one day, and we're sitting in this economic complicated crisis right now, so it's hard to even think about something like this, right? But I also know, and we all know, that our patrons keep telling us what they want. And a lot of times it's about more pools. We know our pools are packed. So I appreciate Janine talking about the creativity that will be needed in the future. My question is about the non-residential fees. I'm wondering, like, hospitals and schools, do they also have to pay those fees?
Typically, yes, and I included in your packet right now the Administrative Procedures Guide, what we as staff use to implement the SDC. We have a very old, complicated, outdated table for the non-residential fees and how the collecting jurisdictions, the city and the county, calculate. So we've had Deb give us some options of simplifying that. And both would pay, but they're usually, they're not very high compared to some other uses. I had started to play around with the numbers, and I've sent those tables off to the city and the county for their input, and of course the chamber on which they think is most suitable for our needs and how they can implement that as well. But yes.
I just can't help but wonder, like with schools, when those folks already live in the area, so they already paid the SDCs, right, originally, or maybe that's not fair.
It's the employees of the school. So you might have a teacher that works in Portland but teaches in Beaverton or Aloha.
You're right. Thank you, Janine. I appreciate you clarifying that. Here I am thinking of the kids.
No, we've been very careful not to double charge people who live in district.
Heidi, did you have something else, or is it just your hand still up? Okay, Tia?
I had one last question about the non-residential. I know lots of times when we've seen data in the past about SDCs, it's comparing the, for other districts or whatnot, it's comparing our SDCs for residential compared to, like Portland's or whatnot. Is our non-residential on par with other jurisdictions as far as SDC?
Yeah, the updated numbers, there's quite a wide range of SDCs charge for both residential and non-residential. Just to give you some examples on the non-residential cost per employee, so you can see in the table here, at the full cost, it'd be $755 per employee, and under the discounted rate, it's $535. Tigard, for example, is about $550 per employee, and the most expensive one I saw was, I think, both Hillsborough and Lake Oswego were over $1,000, or Lake Oswego was around $1,000, and I think Hillsborough was about $1,100 or $1,200. So,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, you are, even if you went the max, you'd still be in the middle of that range. So yeah, and of course there are some on the lower end, but yeah, it's definitely within the regional range.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Oh, Felicita?
Sorry, just to follow up on that. Because, so I think you said Hillsborough and Tigard, but none of those have their own special parks district, right? So those fees are inclusive of their entire city fees, or is that what they charge for parks?
Parks only.
Thank you. That is very helpful.
Thank you so much. I think my only follow-up question was in the letter, Janine, that you had called out, where I didn't notice any explanation on why we landed at 30. So if you guys could give a little bit of context on why we chose the 30% number.
Yes, and that was, I have it in my notes for a slide coming up, but I'll just cover that now.
Oh, no, we can hold off. That's okay.
No. It's just a few slides away. So when we did the analysis, me alone, I was stuck between 25 and 30% because we still have to add in our compliance cost and the administrative fees, which, as Deb said, could be another 5% on top of these numbers. So I spoke with both your general manager, Doug, as well as the director of business services, Lori Baker, to really pull on their knowledge and their feel. And Lori was very helpful with her background and experience. And both of them recommended the 30%. So that's how we came up with that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Felicita, your hand's still up. Is that another one? Nope. Okay. All right. Thank you. Keep moving.
Okay, so for the first question on your place sheet is the non-residential implementation. And it's funny, I was speaking with the former director of business and facilities, and he said he read the report because he just couldn't stay awake. And I said, did you find my one mistake? And he said, no. But the question is whether we should phase in the increase. And in the example I provided in the packet, I was assuming I had just shown the fully funded, but with the this shows both at 30% funding the rec aquatic centers and fully funding, how phasing in over 2 years can lessen the impact. And this is, again, acknowledging that we've been low. Do we really want to give a big increase? This will probably, the fees be effective January 1 if we stick to plan, which we are on course to do. So our recommendation is yes, to phase it in over 2 years. So
I just want to verify. So this is just for non-residential, or are we going to discuss residential too? And then it's like we can phase one, but not the other, or vice versa? Or is it just because we're adjusting?
This is because this is a large impact to the non-residential. If you decide that you want to fully fund the rec aquatic centers, then I recommend that in August we discuss phasing that in. But as you see, when we get to the residential one, that we're either decreasing. So what, do we phase in the decrease as well as the increase? That is a more neutral when you average them out, with the multifamily decreasing.
Okay, perfect. So, but we can keep them in separate boxes as far as phasing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
So if we could get feedback from the board, because what we need out of this is that clear feedback so we can complete the methodology.
Okay. Tia, where are you leaning on this one?
I mean, we haven't talked about fully or versus 30, but I'm leaning towards 30. Or that's where I kind of land on. I don't think that we need to phase. If it was like something for residential or something like that, to me that's like yes. But as far as just buildings and I mean, who's really going to be building that many buildings really now with COVID and people are starting to work from home? Like, I think all of that's going to get reevaluated anyways, but that might be a just very narrow view. But I feel like from a business perspective, all of that they should be the ones that are really helping their community. So I feel like phasing is not really needed. And especially if we've been under charging them, and compared to other districts, it's not an astronomical increase. I would be more towards just putting it into effect, but it's a group decision.
Thank you, Tia. Heidi?
I want to confirm, Janine, what you said. So were you suggesting that we do a 30%?
Yeah, we are. The next question is on the level of service, and it was kind of hard to decide which to do first of these questions. We are recommending the 30% funding of recreation aquatic centers. So the 535 rate for non-residential.
Okay. And I agree with that. I sort of side as well with Tia with respect to phase in or not phasing in non-residential. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Heidi. Wendy?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the 30%. I would prefer the phasing, and the reason is we need many partners when we're going to go forward on eventually a bond measure. I think we will go forward with that, and we will need many partners, certainly our patrons, but we will also need the business community. If we can work with them as much as possible, I would like to see us do that. So that would be my reasoning. I do fully hear that we have been undercharging. Our current fee is low, and we can say, well, you know, it's time to make it up. And if the times were not what they are, I would agree with that. But I probably personally would be more comfortable with the 2-year phase in. However, I will go with the board majority, obviously, with that. So thank you.
Felicita?
30% is good with me. And then I would actually also lean towards phasing in, mostly due to the economic climate that we are in. And I think it's a nice gesture to our business community. It still gets us to where we want to be in 2 years. But I think that's an easy thing. Not easy, but I think something that we can do, all things considered.
Thank you. Heidi?
I will echo, thank you, Wendy, for bringing up that point. Like we need to keep our business community chamber, and we need to recognize those partnerships. So I do err on the side of phasing in as well, with that in mind.
Thank you, Heidi. Tia?
I just had a question about if we did or didn't. If we didn't phase, is the SEC just charged to the, like if things are in process right now, it's not like we're backtracking and saying, well, now you owe us more, or if like plans were already submitted and whatnot, this is just for future.
if we assume you adopt the new methodology at your November meeting, we have to give the collecting jurisdictions notice. So realistically, it would be for building permits that are applied for after January 1. So after the effective date. So no, we can't go back and say, everybody between July and November, pay more money.
Yeah, which I wouldn't want to happen. Yeah,
No.
so I was just clarifying. Okay, perfect.
Perfect. So are you changing, or are you still?
I mean, I will go with the majority, but I still think that I still think that we should just go for the full phase, but we'll see what Ashley has to say.
Thank you, Tia. It was kind of fun to learn about new non-residential. I think this one was a newer area for me, and it was also nice to learn that we were on the lower end, right? Because I think a lot of the emails we get tend to say, you're so high for housing. So I do think there's room, right, for us to adjust our rate and still be middle ground. I am definitely leaning towards the 30% funding of AQUATIC in the plan. And I am in favor of the phase-in approach. Just even though yes, it's $138, but that is still a per person cost. And so depending, on what type of business or building is being built, it could still have an impact on a business. So I am in favor of phasing, given everything that we are going through with COVID.
Thank you. And just so you know that if we somehow get a vaccine and we're bouncing back between now and November, which is, wouldn't that be beautiful? But this will be there'll be several resolutions. The resolution adopting the methodology, a resolution adopting the project list, and then a resolution adopting the new fees. So we do have time to revisit this question, but thank you for that feedback.
Thank you.
So again, this gets to how much of the recreation aquatic centers should we fund with the SDCs? A reminder that the full cost will remain in the project list. And this slide shows the impact on the unit rate with fully funding the rec aquatic centers. As you can see, all but the smallest tier of single family housing sees an increase, with significant increases at those top two tiers. Multifamily housing, where much of the affordable and the middle housing occurs, would increase by 12%. Contrast that to if we fund 30%. Here, the top two tiers do see an increase, but it's 2% and 10% respectively. And then the multifamily housing and the smaller tiers, again, where you see the affordable housing being built in that missing middle housing, those are all seeing meaningful decreases. A reminder that these aren't the final numbers. There's likely to be some fluctuation, but this gives you a picture of what we're looking at. So here's the question, and I think I have an answer, but should we fully fund? What I didn't put in the slide is, should it be fully funded? Should it be 10%, 25%, 30%? If we can take a poll of the board. We're recommending 30%.
Tia?
I'm good with the 30%.
Heidi?
Yes, 30%.
Felicita?
I'm good with the 30%. I think that, I think this presents an opportunity for us in the future to talk to voters if a pool, a rec aquatic is something that they want. I also think that everything that I'm seeing around the increases and or decreases very much aligns with our values, and the sole reason and the main reason we came to talk about this whole methodology in the first place, around our commitment to ensuring we were not a significant barrier to the affordable housing community and the need for more affordable multi-family housing. So yes, 30%.
Wendy?
Yes, 30%.
Wonderful, thank you. I am in agreement, 30%.
Thank you. Change the slide in my notes. So this, now we're getting into affordable housing, and you know, I want to thank the board for directing us to redo the methodology, because as Felicita just pointed out, this is very meaningful, and in light of what we're seeing with systemic racism in our country, when you look at zoning and how that has worked, housing has contributed to that systemic racism. As mentioned in the letter and in your packet, Washington County has a significant shortfall of affordable housing of 12,000 units. While experts have recommended that code barriers be removed before cash incentives are provided, I had the joy of listening to several affordable housing webinars recently, and that was a consistent message. And the city and the county have both made changes already and are still looking at their codes to make sure that they are removing barriers. So that hurdle has been cleared. I want to keep in mind as you give your recommendations that while SDCs are driven by formula and statute, there's also an art behind these calculations. Part of that art is forecasting the revenues. I remember Keith saying in a meeting that we, meaning me, I do those, we've been wrong. We were closer last fiscal year than the previous one. And I will be taking a look at our revenue projections given COVID. But also we have to forecast what the costs of construction are. And over the past 4 years, we had seen astronomical increases in the cost of construction. So there's art and science here, but also as laid out in your packet, we do not believe that the waivers as per our recommendations will leave a budget shortfall. There are other funding mechanisms. One is our 5-year grant projections. That exhibit is based on probabilities, and I worked with our grant specialist very closely. We've updated it because we were successful in our recommendation for the LWCF for the recently acquired new park. I think that grant is going to be $650,000. So that's a probability over 5 years. We think that we will get $2.9 million in grant revenue for SDC funded projects. We also have the local share, which we have an allocation of 8.6 million and the city 5.7. From what we're recommending, there's about 3 million in SDC projects. And we also think that these waivers are going to help with our negotiations with Metro to show that we are really meeting the Metro bond goals of equity, racial equity, because getting this local share is going to allow us to give waivers. We're not legally required to backfill by adopting it in the methodology, but reality is we still want to be able to deliver projects. And then finally, of course, there's the Metro Trails bonding bond fund, which is a $92 million bucket of money for the region. And we're looking at significant portions of the West Side Trail, including the bridge, which could be a $15 to $20 million project. So that's just to give you a little peace of mind before we jump in. Now, looking at the other side, there's of course the impact to us in giving the waivers, but there's also the positive impact to affordable housing, both the developers and the future tenants of those properties. This is a breakdown at both the 30% MFI or medium family income. Looking at the 5-year projections, the value of the SDCs based on a 30% funding of rec aquatic centers is roughly $2 million. For the 60% MFI housing, that's about $3.5 million, with a total potential impact to both housing and our budget of $5.5 million. So the first question, does the board at a previous meeting had said that for the 30% MFI housing, there should be 100% waiver? The outstanding question was whether that 100% waiver should be for Metro bond housing only or for all housing at this level. And as pointed out in the packet, when we spoke with stakeholders, it was a very clear message that the Metro bond is wonderful, that
Yeah, nope, the 5.8, where is it?
for the cost?
Yeah, that one. Okay, so it's 5.5. And if so that would be, okay, so that's what that one is. What are we getting at this point? What do we expect is a pretty good picture number for grants, other applications, LCI, the land water conservation? What is that number?
So that's this number, 2.89 million, and in your packet, that was Exhibit 1C. So we've reflected that we are successful. We were recommended for funding on the 650,000. So we're already on our way to that 2.9 million. And then it has for various years potential projects for most of these, well, for the next year, and you'll be seeing in September our 2-year grant plan. But LGGP, when we were out with the state on the property we just acquired off of Lombard, the state was so excited about that property. They loved this setting. It already feels like a park with beautiful trees. So they encouraged us, please apply for an LGGP, local government grant program, grant for this property, which made us feel good and very, very hopeful for that development.
Thank you. I guess what this tells me is it makes me so much more comfortable than I have been, in that as long as we, as a district, remember that it's going to be very important for us to find alternate funding mechanisms to make up. We don't have to backfill, but we do need to make up. And so by having access to these kinds of grants, and the bond measures, this makes me feel much more comfortable than I was, because all I could see was just taking the bottom half of the list and lopping it off. And so this makes me feel much better. And I do, in fact, support your recommendation.
Right. And just a reminder, both for the board and for anyone who's listening, what we will be doing is we'll be giving you an annual report. At the same meeting, what we're proposing is you would get an annual report on bonds, or not, excuse me, bonds, grants, and an annual report on affordable housing waivers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. I have to give a little hat tip here to Felicita for really starting this conversation back when she did, and a huge thank you to staff. That slide with all of the other money available to us through the grants and the Metro bond just makes me feel like not only is this the right thing to do, but like our district will be fine. The people will be best served by this. And I am so grateful that we started this work when we did, because I feel that the need could become even greater as a result of what's happening with COVID-19. So I'm super on board. I'm super grateful. I agree we should apply SDC waivers for all 30% MFI housing.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. So moving on to our next question, the bigger one probably is, what should the waiver be for the 60%? Really, this is capturing from 31% to 16% MFI housing. And the board, we saw, really was grappling with this. This is another very heavy question to consider. And again, this is where our stakeholders said that there's usually more funding available at that 30. They need some help getting these units across the financing finish line. And we had been looking at, do we do it for a 50% waiver? All these, you see the iterations in your packet. Along comes Wish Camper, and Justin, their representative who we're talking to, said, well, what if you incentivized it? And I have to tell you that I talked about this at a Washington County Planning Directors meeting, and the city of Beaverton said, this is amazing to have something like this. And it wasn't even this refined. So these are examples, and in addition to which scenario you'd like to go with, if not our recommendation, also I'd give us input on the incentives here. So one is, what I think I've heard you, the board, say is family housing, affordable family housing is very important. So if a development has half the units as family size, they would get a 20% waiver. If they have 12% or greater units at 30% MFI, and most of them, I think the bond requirement, Metro bond requirement, is 10%. So this is getting them to do just a little more. They get another 20% waiver. This is all going to be subject to that cap we'll discuss in a little bit here. Another thing we came up with in talking to Wish Camper is the tax credits usually require a 30-year restriction on affordability. But affordable housing, what Justin explains is at the end of that 30 years, usually a for-profit or a market rate housing provider comes, as he put it, swoops in, buys up that housing and fixes it up to the extent it needs that, and it becomes non-affordable. It becomes market rate. So if they're willing to go further and do 60-year, or you may decide that you want a 90-year, that they'd get another 20%. And then, Wendy, the public open space we have at 10%. The reality is, and I looked at several scenarios, you should see spreadsheets I ran trying to figure out a recommendation. Keith would be proud of me. The reality is, if a developer is providing public open space, the credits they're going to get will be, if not equal to, very close to the SDCs that will be owed. So there might be very few left, but still giving the nod that public open space included is very important. And then finally, the board would have discretion at the last 30%, and we would develop an application form. We wouldn't make it onerous. You know, it would basically, for these first ones, to show us what you have. But this is really the developer's chance to show their need. Again, looking at addressing racial equity, all affordable housing to some extent will do that. But what else are they doing that may address racial equity? What other services are included in development? I had this in mind because of the recently passed Metro measure that addresses the other services, whether it's training and education or mental health care. I, having lived in Washington, D.C., volunteered with Jubilee Housing that did the whole gamut. And then also what you hear, and if anybody is familiar with HUD's former Hope 6 is development fund, is when you have a mix of income levels in a development, you get a richer experience for everybody. So again, the questions are, do you agree with this recommendation? If not, what is the board's preference? And then, do you like what we've laid out here, or do you want to make some tweaks? And we can always come back with those tweaks. So that doesn't have to be decided today, but we do want to start getting the policy ready for you for adoption this fall. So Ashley?
Thank you. Felicita?
Thank you, Janine. This is exciting. So one thing, I for the most part, I like this. For one reason, because it forces us to continue to engage in dialogue around what is happening in this community, and continue to understand the barriers this community is facing. So I think that's really helpful and holds us accountable. Two, I do not agree with the public open space component. Not that I don't value public space, but in my conversations with affordable housing developers, that public open space is housing. And so I would never want to incentivize someone to take away housing. And I know it's much more complicated than that, and it doesn't mean I don't value public open space. But my motivation here and my values are really focused on not being a barrier to the affordable housing community and getting people in our community housed. So I'm just not a big fan of that piece. And then I guess my question is really, like, Janine, what have you heard aside from Wishcamper and aside from the city? What have you heard from our community? Our affordable housing developers regarding this, or is this still too new?
We have not heard other than Wishcamper and then the for-profit venture properties commenting in. What we will do in the August meeting with our stakeholders is we're going to report back what the board has said, clear direction, and then open. Sorry, that's one of my dogs playing with a toy. It's their feeding time.
So yeah, so I guess I would say that I like, for the most part, what's here, and I like that it allows us some discretion, even based on how we're feeling economically at the time, what we feel that we can do. But I do want to get some more feedback from our affordable housing developers to make sure that we're not creating any unnecessary barriers, because all the intent here is all wonderful, but I want to make sure the impact is also wonderful too. So thank you, Janine, very much.
Thank you. Tia?
I'm very supportive of this idea, but Janine, I wanted to clarify. I mean, do we have to, because we have a section that's discretionary, do we even need to do a case by case? Can we just not call it all discretionary at the time, and then within our, I don't know, as a board yearly, we can fairly come up with these, you know, different bullets of where we stand, and, you know, based on the degree of what's needed in the community, how much money we have left for our cap, those kinds of things, so we can prioritize, like, you know, do we need to push for family? Do we need, or is there something that we're not even considering that's not on this list that would be, you know, mind blowing or whatnot? I guess, is it very important to call out these details right now, or can we just say, which I think was the original plan before, that it's just going to be discretionary based on the board's decision?
This was an attempt to give some discretion for the board, but also a little certainty to affordable housing developers, and try to get them, encourage them to potentially go further in what they might be proposing. And also, what we see this as helping us with is getting to the table early, like we are with Wish Camper. But yes, if you wanted just to every year set down what your priorities, these could change on an annual basis. But it's also, I feel it's nice to give the developers a little certainty that if they do X, Y, and Z, assuming we're under the cap, that they will be eligible for waivers.
Okay, this is just like a lot, this new thing is just a lot of stuff to digest, so I can't, it's like a new concept that I feel like I have to sit on before. I like the idea moving forward of some kind of thing, and in my head, I don't know how fast it is to develop policy, but in my head, it's easier to just say discretion, and then we develop those bullet points, you know, to our standards, and it can be, it's open to manipulated, versus if you put it in policy, we're kind of stuck with it for 5 years. Am I not? Is that not? Yeah, would that be the case?
What I think it would be is the resolution adopting affordable housing would say that the 60% is discretionary, and I'll run it by legal counsel to say that criteria to be determined by the board on an annual basis. So I mean,
I definitely think it's helpful that we have criteria and motivation and stuff, and that's definitely, I think from a board perspective, it's a lot more transparent, so we're not playing favorites with different builders, but this is what our criteria. I just don't, to commit to something for 5 years for me of something like this is a bit much that I have to digest first and really think about. But I do echo what Felicia said, that I would like other builders to comment on it to see if they have other ideas or other affordable housing, if they would, you know, have other bullet points that they would think would be helpful for that we're missing also.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Heidi?
Well, this is exciting and great, and yes, it is quite a bit to digest. I would also echo the issue and concern with the public open space concept, because with some of the folks that we met with previously in affordable housing, public space was not something that they were really keen on, you know, that, you know, cutting into the housing that they could then provide. I need a little bit of time too, with respect to just knowing, you know, are these the right bullets to be considering on that case by case basis, and so that input from our housing partners would be really helpful. And I don't know if this would be an opportunity for us as board members to re-engage with those folks that we've spoken with a few months back and continuously for some of us. But I thank you for this work, Janine. It's very impressive. I too am just a little bit uncertain at this point.
What we'll do is if the board as a whole likes the idea of discretion on the 60%, we will immediately by the end of the week email this to all our stakeholders. We have, I don't know, 20 to 25 stakeholders, and I think we've captured all the affordable housing developers within that. So we'll send this question out, and then we are meeting with them on August 4th. So in advance of your next board meeting.
That would be great.
And then we're making it very clear that the August 12th, that is a hearing, that's their opportunity to come in and talk to you.
Okay, great. That would be really helpful. I think just having a little more of their input as it relates to this would help some of us make a clear decision.
Thank you.
Wendy.
Thank you. First, I want to thank again staff for listening to us. We've come at you from all sorts of directions, and I really appreciate that you've listened to us. With regard to your recommendations on the case-by-case basis, I appreciate trying to give certainty as far as we can. When the board asks for, let's just have total discretion and we'll just sort of make it up as we go along. Sorry, that sounds cavalier. I don't mean it that way. But I think that causes a great deal more work for staff. And so I'm not terribly excited about just making everything discretionary. Number one. Number two, I think that the recommendations or the ideas that you've come up with are appropriate. That half the units have to be family size. That's one of the concerns we had, was that we could really serve families for this. This is a good way to do that. I like the idea that it's 12% instead of 10%, because what we have is somebody from the business community who is saying, hey, we can bring a little more to the table rather than just, what you can drag out of us or beat out of us. And so I think they're coming with good intentions. I like the 60-year affordability restriction. I was concerned about affordability restrictions not being significant enough. I think this helps. I'd go for 90, but 60 is certainly better than 20 or 30. As you know, I have been the proponent of public open space, and I cannot see this without that. So I will just put that out there. I cannot see approving. At this point, I cannot vote for this if we do not have public open space. And there are several reasons for that. One is that I think we give the housing community a chance to be more creative. People who are living in small units, lots of people in small units need public open space. I want to make sure that they are a participant in that, not just a recipient. So to me, I really want the public open space. I've been very open, so to speak, from the beginning about that. I am very open as to what that can mean. It can be very broad, but in my case, I think that the waiver for 60% MFI housing, the recommendation that staff is making on a case-by-case basis, that suits me just fine. So thank you.
Thank you. Tia, did you have something else?
I did. I just, Janine, where did that 12% units of the 30 MFI come? Like, where did 12% come from? Is that just?
Looking at the Metro bond, again, my recollection, it's been about a week or so since I've read it, that they require 10%. And then looking at the Reach Marianne, SEPA, Cedar Grove, and Wish Camper, what they're doing, and they're all between 10 and I believe 12 or 15%. So again, 12% was just a starting point for discussion. Where I really see this going right now is getting, if there is consensus on discretion, then August have the hearing, and then we can still adopt the resolution by October, say your October meeting, and then after that start to develop the criteria. Again, still engaging with our stakeholders, but not having to rush to a decision.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thank you.
Felicita?
Yeah, I just so it's always okay for us to disagree, right? It's always okay. With regards to the public space, I just want to say that it's not about values, it's about logistics. And I think in our ideal, like what happened with SEPA is like the absolute dream, that there was enough land for them to be able to do that, that they partnered with us. I mean, it's just, I couldn't even dream that big, and then it happened. And so I guess I would encourage, I like Heidi's idea. Let's hold us accountable and like do some research on our own and find out like how do our affordable housing development peers feel about this. Maybe they think all of it's brilliant. Maybe they think all of it's problematic. Like, we need to do the homework and learn. So Janine, I guess, let us know how we can help you.
Tia? Oops. Okay. Yeah, I really
Oh,
love...
sorry.
Oh, you do? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. I pressed the wrong button. I pressed my hand and says mute. I mean, I will say, based on whether, if we're looking at Wendy or Felicia's point of view or whatnot, just because we have it in the case by case section doesn't mean a developer is going to take it necessarily if it doesn't pan out financially or whatnot. So, and I could go either way theoretically. I mean, with COVID in effect right now, and knowing people who do live in apartments, I do know that they do value public open space when you're stuck inside all day and you can't go anywhere, especially during quarantine. Just having a place to step outside is helpful, and I think it does speak to potentially creating a space for community, which we talked to about earlier when we were talking about South Cooper Mountain. So I would like, if we do move forward with this, Janine, when you are talking with developers and just maybe clarifying more there, because you have we've only talked to a handful of people, but if your outreach is to like 25 25 groups and stuff, that would be a good question to clarify, because they may say 10% isn't even worth it for us, so we wouldn't do it anyway, so then there's no point in putting it in. But yeah,
absolutely. And that stakeholder list is both for-profit and affordable housing developers.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that we are giving options to say, hey, we are willing to, let me turn on my camera, sorry. We are willing to offer discounts for the 60% units. I just think this is great incentive, and it may need a little bit more massage. I kind of love the in perpetuity, but I think 60 is like such a huge improvement. I'm good for that. And I think what's nice about this is having the options available means something we offer might fit someone's project. And if that means more affordable housing is built as a result, I think that's a really positive outcome. So it sounds like my colleagues are leaning towards we need a little more work on this. And it sounds like maybe we have time to allow that. And I would also like to hear the feedback from our home builders, right? Our for-profit and affordable. So looks like Tia's got another.
Did we talk about the cap? I know we mentioned, how much was the cap for?
The next two questions are the cap and the sunset provision.
Okay.
So
we'll wait then.
That actually, and is there anything else that anyone wants to add on the 60% MFI housing? What I'm hearing is you like the idea of discretion, but let's take the time to talk to our partners to develop what criteria might be, and then we'll work through that and what would become an application form outside of the policy so that the board may change it from time to time.
I think that's what I heard too.
Wonderful. let me just get my mouse working. And again, I apologize when you hear squeaking. Part of that's now my cat who's joined the fun. So moving forward, should there be a sunset provision? And actually what I have in my little cheat sheet notes is we're almost there. There's only 2 questions. If you need, take a deep breath again. But thank you for sticking this out. With regard to a sunset provision, staff recommendation is yes. 5, it would be the earliest of, and I've worked for several jurisdictions in my career, and I haven't heard it so much from you, but a lot of times a council or a commission doesn't want to necessarily tie the hands of future boards. So it would be the earliest of a board resolution rescinding the policy on affordable housing waivers. Or it could be the adoption of an updated methodology. We are required to do an update every 5 years, but as you well know, the board can direct us to do that sooner. Or if we reach the cap within 3 years, that would be the end. At that point, of course, you could direct us to either update the policy or do another methodology. And then the final trigger could be 5 years. That 5 years, again, coincides with when we would have to do an update of the methodology, but it also coincides with the Metro bond. So Ashley, would you like to poll the board?
Yes. Wendy, what are your thoughts?
Real simple, yes.
Thank you. Tia?
Yes.
Heidi?
Keeping it simple. This is an easy one for us. Thank you.
And Felicita?
Yes.
All right. I am a yes as well.
Wonderful. Last one. So should there be a cap on SDC waivers? And a reminder that it was roughly $2 million for the 30% MFI and then a total of $5.5 million for all projected affordable housing within a 5-year period in our district. Looking at the projected grant revenue and those other sources of income, we are recommending a cap of $3.5 million. Ashley, you want to?
Okay, yep. Tia?
Yes.
There's something else to add?
I mean, for me, with doing, well, I guess this is for over 5 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
then yes.
Okay, thank you. Heidi?
Yes, I'm gonna yes on this.
Awesome. Wendy?
Yes.
Felicita?
Yes, and I appreciate the person who came up with tying it to grants very much. I don't know who that is.
That was Keith.
That's what I would have guessed. Okay.
I am also a yes, but I will say there was a big part of me that really wanted to go for the 5.5. I didn't think everyone was comfortable with that, and I feel like 3.5 is going to make such a major impact, and I feel really good about this. So yes.
Thank you. So those are the questions we were seeking feedback on. As I've mentioned throughout this presentation, we do have a stakeholder meeting coming up on August 4th. We will provide our stakeholders a summary of what we've heard from you and then additional questions, as well as the final recommendation. We are also working with the city and the county on their collection fee. It has been 1.6% since we first adopted SDCs in 1998. The county asked for an increase at the end of when we adopted our last methodology 4 years ago. It was too late. So we made sure we included them in the conversations early. So we're working on that, as well as the time that they would need to implement the new fee structure for single family housing. What you may see again is that we would implement the average rate on January 1, and If they need additional time to program software, that we would give them the time that they need to do that, of course. We'll be back in August to have a hearing on the methodology. After that, we will give the required notices, wrap up the report, and have that available for 60 days review prior to your November hearing. Also, what I've started is updating our administrative procedure guides, and I am just starting to look at updating the 5-year capital improvement plan. That update, it will be to reflect the new SDC rates, but also we need to take another look at our revenue projections, at least for this year and next year, probably for 2 to 4 years based on COVID. I will be looking to see what the 2008 recession, how that impacted collection, and then try to project based on that. We will see a decrease in revenue projections. We will take both those items to you, introduce them to you in November, and then have them approved by the board in December. So we're close, but we still have a lot of work. We will add to these next steps is maybe November, December, January, continuing the discussion on what the application will look like for that 60% MFI waiver. With that, I can take any additional questions. If not, I know you have another presentation. So thank you so much for taking this big block of time and giving us what we need to complete this work.
Thank you, Felicita.
Yeah, well, first of all, huge thanks to Janine and all this work, and to everyone, because it's been a couple years of us working on this. So thank you, thank you. Real fast, I apologize if I missed this. With the 100% waivers of the 30% MFI, are we requiring that they be 30% for a certain amount of time? Is that part of?
There's a requirement for 30 years already in place.
Oh,
the
okay.
The city is getting agreements for 60 years. So it's
Awesome.
the county developed that will have a minimum of 30 years, but we.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we need to create another rule. I just wanted to make sure. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Does anyone else have any other questions or comments for Janine? Okay, thank you so much, Janine. Can we take a quick 2-minute break? Stand up, stretch your legs, use the bathroom, and then we'll come right back to hear about Park Patrol. So 7:04. Okay, is everyone back?
Felicita's here.
Heidi's here.
We'll give it just 30 more seconds.
I'm here.
Tia, are you back? Okay, let's go ahead and get going. So, Mark.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm not sure that I can adequately follow the SDC discussion, but I will give it my best shot. So I'm Mark Pierce. I'm your Security Operations Manager, and I'll be providing an update on security operations for you this evening. First, I would like to introduce our Park Patrol team, and they are from left to right: Mitch Frank, Rogelio Evangelista Morton, Shane Clemens, Everardo Medina, and Colton Fink. The entire team is comprised of part-time 29-hour-per-week employees. They are each certified by the state of Oregon as unarmed security professionals, as is our security operations department. Park Patrol does carry pepper spray as a last resort defensive weapon, and no other weapons, but they are certainly expected to resolve conflict through verbal skills and verbal communication. The mission of the Security Operations Department is to protect district assets, to provide staff training, to provide assistance to patrons and staff, and most importantly, to act as district ambassadors in order to promote access for all. Success for our team means an engaged and informed public who share the district-wide security role with us. And for example, that shared role could be through simply reporting concerns via telephone or website. It could be volunteering as a park ambassador, or it could mean engaging a member of the Park Patrol team in person out in the field. We use a very proactive ambassadorship approach to dealing with our patrons and visitors, and that involves getting involved with people in a positive manner when we're not called, such as chatting with people in parks about their visit, giving badge stickers to kids, or educating our patrons on district guidelines as opposed to hard enforcement. Our continuing focus is to treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of the circumstances, and to exhibit a heightened sensitivity to the social justice challenges that we all face. The beauty of that approach is that everyone is treated with care and compassion, but at the same time, we must always be mindful and sensitive to the reality that many people of color in our community have fears surrounding those in uniform or those in positions of authority. So in Park Patrol, we keep these conversations at the forefront every day so that we can all stay focused on making meaningful and lasting change. The team conducts patrol walks through parks and facilities every day as an indicator that we are engaging and accessible to everyone. And I believe that most of our patrons view the team as very engaging and very accessible. Much of the training component for district staff is currently on hold, but we do have plans for very meaningful and sustained training moving forward through the district safety training module project team, and I am a member of that team. For Park Patrol, training is an everyday component that's built into our work. We do conduct daily briefings with both shifts to critically assess what we did that day, how we did, as well as asking ourselves what could have been done differently. Patron feedback is really a major source of input for us, whether that's positive or negative. I get positive feedback from patrons regarding the performance of Park Patrol on a regular basis. And when we have missteps, we own it, we learn from it, we pledge to our patrons not to make the same mistake again, and we move forward. When patrons have concerns regarding their interactions with Park Patrol, team members are required to give the patron their name, as well as one of my business cards, so that that patron can follow up with me if they have further questions or concerns. And my feedback from speaking to patrons is that they very much appreciate that approach. And without going into the big long story, as an example of that, we had a patron who felt that in her conversations with Park Patrol, one of the employees did not believe what she was saying. And so she called me and we chatted about that. And in speaking with Park Patrol about it, the second officer who was there said to the first officer, well, the reason she didn't believe you was because of your nonverbal facial expressions, because they told me that you didn't believe her. So how did she feel? And so that was kind of an aha moment for me from the standpoint of Park Patrol can have those conversations among themselves and with me and really understand how critical that nonverbal communication is to people. So I believe that it's critical that we continue to transition from the Park Patrol mindset to more of a community services model, since community service makes up the bulk of our workload. This model fits hand in glove with our ambassadorship approach, and that concept will be discussed certainly more in depth by all of us as the district continues to reimagine itself with an eye toward our future. During the past year, Park Patrol staff training has included customer service, DEIA, conversational Spanish, which is ongoing, conflict resolution, run, hide, fight, lockdown, lockout, parent reunification, state required Department of Public Safety standards and training courses, effectively dealing with camps, and missing person searches. Now that list is not all inclusive, but it includes what we consider as the critical topics with employee safety and ambassadorship at the forefront. 2 of our 5 team members speak, read, and write Spanish fluently, and they teach our ongoing conversational Spanish sessions that I previously mentioned. A great example of training to the ambassadorship model is the way that we handle camps and campers. And again, it's our goal to treat everyone with dignity and respect. So when we encounter campers, we offer them water, hand warmers if it's cold outside, street routes, resource books, and large heavy plastic bags for them to carry their belongings in. We will also offer to assist them in gathering their things and help them exit our properties in a safe manner. And in the event that we clean up an unoccupied camp, we preserve all the items found. We leave a notice at the site with instructions for retrieving the belongings, and we keep those belongings for a minimum of 60 days so that that camper has the opportunity to reclaim their belongings. And we do many other things to be supportive of our houseless population, and that includes making referrals to our safe parking program, which we do on a regular basis, We make referrals to Family Promise, who we have an ongoing relationship with, and then by assisting in other district-wide initiatives like the Stir Center shelter that we recently had opened during COVID-19 issues. And so a great example of that, you know, in reality involves we get a fair number of citizen patron complaints that surround someone sleeping in our parks during the daytime. And we almost universally go and talk to those people, and they all have the same story. I don't have a place to stay. I could not sleep last night because I felt unsafe, so I came here today to sleep. And so they are allowed to sleep in our parks or nap in our parks during daytime hours on a regular basis, with an eye toward we then give them the appropriate referrals when they're ready to go, and they move on to where they're going. Security Operations provides a wide variety of patron and staff information and education on a daily basis. So off-leash dogs, after-hours park use, graffiti, and smoking marijuana continue to comprise most patron-initiated calls. So calls coming into us from patrons. However, most Park Patrol time is spent assisting patrons and staff with a wide variety of concerns, as well as proactively providing a presence at parks, facilities, and trails so that patrons and visitors feel welcome and safe. Park Patrol also commits some of its time to enforcement issues that require immediate attention. This includes people causing disturbances or camping, alarm response, suspicious persons or circumstances. And based on the circumstances of each event, Park Patrol may have a verbal conversation with the parties involved, and that comprises the vast majority of cases. They may issue a written exclusion warning, or they may issue a written exclusion. And just to be clear, exclusions are not criminal in nature. They are not a citation. Park Patrol does not have the authority to issue criminal citations. Exclusions are simply a notice to the involved party that that party is not able to be on our properties for a specified period of time. Exclusions are most commonly issued for after-hours usage of parks, for smoking marijuana, and use of alcohol. Exclusions that are violated can become criminal trespass issues and may be enforced by law enforcement through criminal citation or arrest. The reality is that rarely occurs. One time in the 19-month tenure that I have had, that has actually occurred where a person was cited for violating an exclusion. As you can see from this summary, and I'll give you a second to digest it as I talk, exclusions and exclusion warnings comprise a very small percentage of Park Patrol's total activity. As a matter of fact, it's less than 0.5% of all activity. By comparison, proactive patrol walks, security checks of parks and facilities, and assisting patrons make up about 55% of their activity. And in the vast majority of cases, we use what I would term soft enforcement to remind and educate our patrons of rules violations. And that generally involves a conversation. And that usually is all that is needed to gain compliance. As you can see over on the right, some future budget key performance indicators. These were developed based on budget committee discussions, board meeting discussions, and internal discussions. And so they will be modified in our future budget documents so that they more accurately reflect our ambassadorship approach. Security Operations continues to collaborate with our maintenance operations staff to address graffiti and cleanup and repair of vandalism. We also continue to collaborate with our information services and maintenance departments to upgrade the card access systems, the intrusion alarm systems, our fire systems, and replace our facility camera systems district-wide. Related to graffiti, Lulu Balceros-Jones, our cultural inclusion specialist, is joining me to discuss a pilot project that we've worked on with the communications team that will allow our community to express themselves through some alternative means. And so, Lulu, I will turn this over to you for a few minutes, and if you'll just let me know when you want the slide advanced.
Hello, everybody. So the Park Patrol team, in their efforts to reduce the occurrence of graffiti as vandalism in specific impacted areas of the district, found the opportunity to reconduct THPRD's preventive measures into a positive source of inspiration, connection with the community. So Mark, as the head of Park Patrol, mobilized many of our departments. We all participated. Staff for maintenance, design and development, and communications came together. The objective was to start thinking about and creating appropriate spaces of expression and community gathering. Taking into account the current climate with the Black Lives Matter movement and other situations arising as a response of systemic racism, Mark and the team were looking for something that was also an opportunity to demonstrate how THPRD stands with our community in solidarity for racial justice. So after several meetings and asking internal and external experts, there were two opportunities that were brought forth. The first one is message gardens, and the second one, talking walls. Message gardens, they're basically painted rock gardens, as you can see in the pictures. It's a place where families, friends, community members can share their thoughts and support for racial justice and other socially relevant themes. There were two locations identified as best to start the pilot. One is Schiffler Park, and the second one is A.M. Kennedy. We kicked off on July 1st with the participation of the City of Beaverton's Diversity Advisory Board and other community members that were visiting the park that day. Since then, we have been promoting the activity through social media, using hashtag THPRD Rocks and using all sorts of videos. We're also inviting small groups of families, co-workers, friends to participate in small paint rock parties on either of the sites. Of course, we're keeping our groups small due to all the requirements that we have to follow. Several community-based organizations have been sharing the activity on their social media and will start participating with the small groups. Additional to all this, Park Patrol asked for cards, small cards that they could carry with them while doing their community engagement work to promote those message gardens. And then the second thing is the talking walls. Well, as we all know, public art promotes community pride, visual interest, and THPRD has several ideal spaces where we can have murals with messages of solidarity and other relevant themes. The project, of course, also aims to reduce the occurrence of graffiti as a form of vandalism, and it's also an opportunity to reconduct this activity in a positive way. Mark and the team identified the ideal spaces for these projects, and again, it's two spots. First one is Greenway, second one is Sunset Park. We invited students from local area high schools to use those talking walls as a form of expression and visual communication. And this project is kicking off this month with initial conversations with the Black Student Union from Sunset High School. They are so motivated and they're working on their sketch and proposal to send to us. They also have great contacts with BIPOC artists that will support the students in their proposal and also in the creation of the mural. For both activities, we will continue to do very intentional outreach to other student groups, community-based organizations, and the community as a whole. As you can imagine, we're very excited with the talking walls and message gardens. I think Mark has done a great job leading us into making this valuable space available for the community, and I guess we will keep you posted.
Thank you so much, Lulu. I appreciate it. The continued cooperation between security operations and law enforcement is really critical to the district's mission of protecting our assets and our patrons. Security operations remains committed to fostering a close and cooperative working relationship with the Beaverton Police Department, the Washington County Sheriff's Office, and the Beaverton School District. All three agencies do share our values and a common vision of equity, inclusion, and respect for all. And if I can just share another quick story with you, a couple of weeks ago, I got a call at home on a Saturday night that where the Park Patrol officer related to me that Beaverton Police, and as it turns out, some kids' parents who became involved, had some kids stopped who had found a set of keys outside one of our rec centers and had tried the keys in the doors, and they worked, and the kids entered the rec center. And of course, the alarm went off, and upon the arrival of Park Patrol and the police officers, the kids ran off down the street and were shortly caught. And so the call to me was regarding what was going to happen. And the Park Patrol officer related that they, Beaverton Police, and the parents of these kids all agreed that the kids should not be introduced to the criminal justice system in any way. And they had come up with an alternative solution. And so with the blessing of the parents, the Beaverton Police, and Park Patrol, those kids were issued exclusions from our properties for a period of time. And certainly the parents were very grateful, but it's an example that we were all on the same page when it came to the decision not to involve these kids in anything criminal. So I think that's a great story to share when we talk about shared values. And I want to thank Rhonda over at Beaverton PD for sharing her thoughts with us as well. And you can look at that as I move on here. THPRD Park Patrol contacts law enforcement for support in circumstances where immediate emergencies exist, where a situation might become violent, or when criminal law violations have or are occurring. Law enforcement contacts us for a much wider variety of issues, including assistance with alarm calls, access to properties or buildings, missing persons, support for investigations, or citizen calls to police that can be handled by Park Patrol that are occurring on our properties. Law enforcement also responds to THPRD related calls from citizens during hours that Park Patrol is not on duty. THPRD and the Beaverton Police Department do have a written portable radio use agreement that outlines the use of loaner portable radios from the Beaverton Police Department to Park Patrol. The guidelines in that agreement are very specific surrounding usage by Park Patrol and the benefits of the agreement to the citizens of Beaverton and Washington County. The radios also allow for direct contact with the Washington County Sheriff's Office and with Washington County Consolidated Dispatch. No other written agreements exist for services since the district's boundaries fall within Washington County and the city of Beaverton. So in the past year, we have collaborated with both law enforcement agencies in a number of areas. And on our end, that included the changing of the uniforms for Park Patrol so that they are easily distinguished from law enforcement. They worked with us on our Love 'em and Leash 'em campaign with a unified COVID-19 video messaging and with numerous investigations, including missing persons, mail thefts, and vandalism, and many THPRD community events. Other partners out there in the community include Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue and Washington County Emergency Management. Our community engagement outreach is ongoing every day. Again, the ambassadorship approach involves making positive daily contacts with patrons while conducting patrol walks at our properties. Our youth of today are definitely our future, which makes it critical that we proactively engage in conversations with them on a regular basis. A couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago now, I guess, when skate parks were still closed, we went up to the skate park to talk to some kids that were up there using it while it was still closed. And we chatted with them for a few minutes about what at-home school looked like for them. And these were freshmen in high school, so they were very excited to tell us all the benefits of doing schoolwork for a couple hours a day and then doing whatever they wanted to the rest of the day. And so they went on, and we concluded that with, well, you know, the skate park is closed and by the governor's orders. And they said, yeah, we know, we understand, you know, we're going to take off. And so we engaged them proactively in a conversation that had nothing to do with why we were there. And so it didn't sound like, or it sounded much radically different than, hey, the skate park's closed, you've got to leave. So our best community outreach program is our positive day-to-day contact with patrons and visitors. And that engagement is really built into how we do things every day. A few things upcoming that we hope to implement, some new initiatives. One is what we'll call, for lack of better terminology, is a Don't Be a Victim of Crime prevention campaign, which will involve Park Patrol conducting proactive checks of vehicles in our parking lots, and then leaving guests with a card indicating that their vehicle was checked and was secure. Our Paws for Pets program got some traction before COVID hit, and we hope that it will gain some traction as we move forward. That involves engaging dog owners who have their pets on leash and offering the owner a treat for their pet. The treats would be donated by some local companies who we had tentative approval from to provide those treats prior to the COVID shutdown. And we will be following up with those companies over the next few weeks. And then we are developing a proposal to field a Park Patrol employee along with a park ambassador on our trail system, as many of our patrons have expressed a desire to see Park Patrol on a more regular basis on our trails. And we hear them, and we want to be responsive to that. So we believe that the path forward includes continued sensitivity to social justice issues that we are faced with, special attention to the stress that our community is under due to COVID-19, and a focus on community service to our patrons. I want to thank you for your time this evening, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Mark and Lulu. We do have one public comment tonight, so I'm going to ask Secretary Ping to read that onto the record.
Thank you, Ashley. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is from Joey Whiting. It says, hello, thank you for your time. My name is Joey Whiting, and I am the Beaverton Aloha outreach worker with Home Plate Youth Services. Working with houseless and at-risk youth, we are very excited to hear that there would be a discussion tonight around park patrolling. I would like to ask you to consider and to highlight the way that the park patrolling has and continues to disproportionately affect the houseless community, houseless youth, and BIPOC youth. I think that it is also imperative to examine and reassess the intrinsic ties to policing and how the system of policing fails by and large to create truer, safer spaces for everyone in the community. While in the middle of this pandemic as well, it is important to recognize the lack of spaces for houseless folks and how being allowed to spend time in parks can allow houseless people to separate themselves from others and find a bit of rest and ease that we are all struggling to find right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia. Thank you, Joey, for sending in your comments. Do any of my colleagues have questions or comments? Felicita.
I hope I'm not the only one with questions. I'll ask just a couple at a time. And I provided my questions in advance, and I appreciate that Mark already answered a lot of them. And I also appreciate, Mark, that you were responsive a month or so ago when we said we need to have this conversation as part of the bigger national conversations that's happening around justice and police. So a couple quick questions, I guess. I'm curious, Mark, like, what does success look like for you for your department? How do you, I guess, philosophically measure something like that? I mean, what does that mean for you? I know there's numbers and whatnot, but what does it mean as the leader of the department? What does success look like?
I think it's an active partnership with our patrons and our community. And by active, I mean that I hear from our community and speak with our community on a regular basis. And they give me their feedback and they give me their input, and they're comfortable with that relationship between them and Park Patrol. Again, advancing that ambassadorship approach so that people are very comfortable approaching them in the field, approaching me in the field or in the office or by email or whatever that is, but a very active community that's willing to take on the role with us as a part of the community.
And that kind of goes into another question I have of like, how do we encourage community members to kind of like look after their park and own their park? Like, I want to be mindful of the fact that I want to be, because each park is everyone's park, right? Like, I don't have just one. It's the one in my neighborhood isn't mine, and people outside the neighborhood can't be there. That's not okay. But what does it mean to ensure that there's ownership of parks and that people want everyone to feel welcome and safe?
Yeah, you know, I'm still amazed today, and I was amazed when I first took this position at the level of ownership that people have with their parks. Because when I talk to people, they don't say the park or that park. They say my park this and my park that. And I get constant feedback about how they take care of the park, how they pick up trash, how they look after it, and how they call us. And so I think there's really a high level of ownership, at least by our neighbors and our park users already. But I think that ownership is increased with, again, going back to that personal person-to-person relationship that we have. I mean, we can talk philosophy all day or all night, but at the end of the day, it's about action and having those conversations with our patrons and our visitors every single day so that they understand that we care what they're talking about and we care about those parks just like they do.
Thank you, Mark. I'll let somebody else take the floor.
Thanks, Felicita. Do feel free to ask more questions. Wendy?
Thank you. First of all, Mark, I want to thank you very much for the presentation and for the efforts that you and your team have made in the last many months. Your job is not an easy one. You're in the middle. We ask you to do all kinds of things. I think it's very indicative of what we as a community ask our police to do. We ask them to do things they're not comfortable doing. They're not educated to do, but we load it on them anyway. And the last few months have been certainly a picture of what happens when we don't care for those who work for us as well as we should. So I'm very happy that you are able to work with the team you have. You have good external partners that come to the fore when we need them. It's apparently, to me, a very clear relationship. I think that's important. I think the internal relationships with staff are critical. I love what I see you're doing with maintenance and communications. I think those are really important steps forward. And so I actually just wanted to say thank you. I think the efforts that you are making, your team is making, sometimes, your job is tough. People are mad. They come up and they talk to you and they aren't, they left their manners at home. And so I really appreciate the effort that you go through and your team goes through every day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Felicita?
Couple more. Mark, what is the training required before day one? I know you talked about continual training, but what do people come with?
So the DPSST, or the state mandated training, it is a required 14 hours to be certified as an unarmed security professional. And so that's the first thing that they have to have pre-service. And so that training focuses on things like communication, de-escalation of conflict, certainly civil and criminal law, and some emergency operations aspect, but has in the last few years has really moved more toward a communication skills based course. So they have to have that in the beginning, and then certainly the basic familiarity with the park district type training.
Thank you. I fully acknowledge that I know nothing about that training, so maybe you could email me the name so I could research it on my own. Next question. So this was a conversation that happened kind of before your time, and I want to be cognizant of that. It kind of felt to me that the park patrol positions were almost a stepping stone to becoming a police officer. Would you say that's accurate, inaccurate? It depends.
I would say definitely maybe, but it does kind of depend on the individual person. And I will tell you, traditionally, I think that the department became that for a lot of reasons, and with one of them being it's a part-time position, and it is difficult to get more experienced people who are very interested in being invested and staying here for a long time when the positions are part-time. And so traditionally, those have been less experienced folks who are maybe in school or they're working a couple of jobs. And so I think going back to some of the systemic things, that systemically has kind of made us into that training ground for policing, just kind of the way the system has been set up. And so today, yes, all 5 Park Patrol employees aspire to go into criminal law someplace, whether it's policing or as attorneys or somewhere in the criminal justice system.
Okay. Thank you. So if I understand correctly, our Park Patrol number is 5. How do we come up with that number? Is it reflective of need? If you got to decide the total budget, like, would you ask for more? Would you need less? What are your thoughts?
It's I think it's just been reflected by need and growth over the last few years. About 6 months ago, Joff and I started a process with trying to come up with a formula, much like our maintenance department has, a formula for adding personnel as the district grows. And so that project has kind of flamed out at the moment because the person involved in that with us is no longer here. And then, of course, all the COVID things came along. But yes, so since you asked, I will tell you, my vision is for the department to be partially full-time and partially part-time. It is also to have the resources to be able to field a Park Patrol person with a park ambassador on our trail system on a regular basis. And it's also to come up with a full-time position that would be kind of like a Park Patrol lead, who would be that first-line supervisor in the field every day with Park Patrol.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. Then I think my last question is thinking about staff, or I'm wondering how staff engage with our youth that maybe they suspect certain things of, but they aren't sure. Like, how do we approach those situations when we see a group of youth in the park and our internal biases kick in? Like, how do staff handle that?
You know, I would say it really depends on the circumstances. A group of youth in the park really doesn't mean a whole lot to us because our parks are full of youth and groups of youth. And so however, with that said, I think if Park Patrol sees something that's out of the ordinary, that is when they may think about going and talking to whoever it is, whether it's youth or not. And that out of the ordinary may mean a vehicle or several vehicles parked in the parking lot of a closed facility. It may be a group of youth that are gathered at a picnic shelter after dark. Things that are not of the ordinary everyday observations.
Yeah. Would you say that we track any of our exclusions or the things that we're keeping data of? Do we track any of that by race and ethnicity or neighborhood?
We don't.
Okay, I think those are all my questions. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Felicia. Tia?
Hi. So I did have a couple of questions. So we mentioned we have 5 part-time staff. And so how many of the, or I guess, how many of them are actually patrolling or during the day, or is it just like 2 at a time is on clocked in, or?
Yeah,
What
so it depends on the day and the time. So we basically run a day shift and an afternoon shift. And so generally on the day shift, there's one person for several days a week. And then for several days a week, there are 2 people. I have 2 people on the night shift, all except for 2 days or 2 evenings, in which case I only have 1.
Okay. And then when you guys are responding to those instances, is it mostly from them just patrolling around and seeing something, or is it responding to calls that are coming in from the public?
It's really a mix of both. I would say that they generate a little more self-initiated activity than calls from the public.
How
And so,
many, do you know how many calls from the public we usually get? Maybe like a day or a week, or?
I can tell you, as a matter of fact, last week, because I put together a roll-up every week during the COVID crisis. And so last week, Park Patrol generated 1,190 activities. And so the top 5, for example, of those activities are security checks of parks and facilities, patrol walks where they do foot patrols, after hours violations, assisting patrons, and then unauthorized access, which deals with entering closed areas closed due to COVID-19, or physical distancing issues due to COVID-19. So those are kind of our top 5 for the last week.
And then how many of those were calls from the public saying, I see somebody suspicious, can you come check on this?
Yeah, so generally around 40% of those. So they field 350 to 450 calls, like phone calls per week or emails per week.
Okay. And then my other question was, if you know this off the top of your head, how many times do we need to contact either the Beaverton Police or the sheriff to come in to help us with something? Maybe monthly, or weekly, or quarterly?
I can tell you for the past week, because I don't include on my roll-up anything less than 10 incidents, so that stat did not show up for this past week, so it would have been under 10. But that includes police, fire, EMS, all public agency assist. My sense is that that's 3 to 5 per week, and that may be them calling us or us calling them.
And then can you give any more examples of what those incidents could vary from, of why we need to all of a sudden call somebody in?
Yeah, some examples since I've been here. We had a lady who went into the dressing room at one of our aquatic centers who was in a mental health crisis, who we were unable to talk to, and so we had to call the police on that one. We had a guy swimming and bathing in mud in one of our wetlands recently who was also suffering mental health crisis. And we had mental health officers come out, and they managed to talk him out. We occasionally will have people that make threats, physical threats towards Park Patrol because they don't want to be interfered with whatever they're doing, where we have to call them. And you know, sometimes with camps, if there is only one Park Patrol officer working, they are instructed to have the police go with them so that they don't go to a camp alone. So those are a few examples. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Wendy?
No, I have no additional questions. I am continuing to remain in awe of this group and very appreciative they're here.
Okay, your hand was just still up, so I wanted to make sure. Heidi, did you have something?
Just briefly, yeah, I thank you for your work, and I'm just questioning our staffing of this area because it seems like 5 part-time seems so limited in what you can do. And again, I think, you know, our questions about, you know, the calls and what's the demand and the need, and it sounds like the need is there. I also was curious if we've ever had conversations around bike patrol. I know we've, you know, we have our patrol vehicles and then they're doing walks, but because our trail system is so extensive, I'm wondering if there have ever been discussions about bike patrol. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, there have, Heidi, and we actually do have bicycles. We have ride them at special events, and we actually ride them at some of the local runs and walks that go through our parks. The only issue there right now, you know, is a staffing one. I'm not a great fan of putting one bicycle out on a 70-mile trail system. So I prefer to have 2 people, and whether that looks like a park ambassador with them or whatever. But that would be part of our plan if we could get the resources to put someone on the trails.
Sure. And the only other thought that comes to mind, you know, working at the community college and working with criminal justice students, the opportunities that we could seek out to partner with PCC, you know, to do internships and opportunities partnering with Park Patrol for those who are interested in this career and this pathway. So
if you could put me in contact with the right person, I'd love to chat with them about that.
Get you in touch with a couple of their lead faculty department chairs, certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you for what you're doing, though.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi. Doug?
Sure. You know, if I could add, and Heidi, that's a great resource that we need to continue to, you know, tap into. The challenge, of course, like all of these areas, staffing is of course it's endless. Balancing where needs are, you know, our highest thresholds are to ensure safety of our staff, and Mark works, you know, diligently at providing just that. So we're sensitive to not allowing staff to get into unsafe circumstances, but at the same time, we're also trying to balance the rest of the Park District show, and it is tough. The balance of reliance, the ambassador program concept is just more eyes on the parks, and that works in itself very, very well. It's probably a balance between all of that. You know, I think there has been recognition that it would be nice to add at least a full-time position, but I guarantee you, just saying that out loud, it's a phenomenal, as you know, even outside of COVID, but certainly within COVID, it is a phenomenal stress point for everything we've gone through. And it's not in deference to this particular department, but it's the package of the whole that is challenging.
Thank you, Doug. Tia?
Sorry, wrong button again. Mark, I wanted to double check since we did receive that public testimony about homeless. As far as it's a 2-part question. One is, when do we decide to interact with them? Is it after we've known they've established a camp and are staying overnight, or is it only when they're in like in a protected space, like, you know, within the trees of the nature park or whatnot? Or does it have to do with like loitering in parks at all during the day?
No, it really doesn't. We have a lot of people that loiter in our parks during the day.
Yeah.
That's what the parks are for, right?
Right.
So no, I think it comes to our attention when we either get a call from a patron or a staff member that says someone has erected a tent and it looks like they're going to be staying overnight. Is generally when we get those kinds of calls.
Okay, and then as I know you said you help assist and help pack stuff up and then offer some resources, but then are we just like get on your way? Like I'm more thinking about like youth and like are we connecting them with home plate, or is there a way we can, I don't know, give them a ride towards home plate so that they have a better access to those resources rather than saying, here you go, walk off and go find your way?
Yeah, no, generally the way those interactions go, and I'll preface this with, in the time that I've been here, at least, we have dealt with 0 youth homeless in our parks or at our facilities.
Perfect.
That would be a very rare occurrence for us, and I, in fact, have not seen it. But no, the way that interaction looks is we will assist them in packing all their things up. Help them, for example, the nature park is a great example. We will ask them where they're going or where they want to go. And generally at the nature park, for example, they want to go to the Max stop. So we will accompany them and help them carry their things to the Max stop, wherever they want to go. Giving people rides in general, will kick into an insurance coverage issue for us.
Gotcha.
But my experience and my instructions to Park Patrol is they're not to just be summarily booted out of the parks with no information, no explanation, no compassion for the situation that they're in.
Great, thank you.
Felicita?
Two quick things. One, I want to make sure that I give kudos to Rogelio, because he seems to be the staff member that the Park Patrol person I interact with the most. And he is always kind and patient and wonderful. And I greatly appreciate his work in partnership with Virginia Garcia around the food bank, as well as you, of course, Mark. His Spanish skills, his patience, and his ability to crowd control is just wonderful. And I think it's a perfect example of the type of work that we want Park Patrol to be doing, right?
Yeah.
Yes, so thank you. And then to follow up with Tia's question about like the county and the city, I guess I'm wondering, so I think you said earlier, like we don't have like MOUs or contracts with them, which I suppose makes sense because we're within their jurisdiction. But what happens if one of our staff members, one of our Park Patrol sees an interaction, or the Beaverton Police or the Sheriff's Department staff is reacting in a way that is not consistent with our values? I guess I'm wondering what happens then? What's the process? How do we have a good enough relationship that we can have a candid conversation? Like, do they understand our values? Do they understand that, we never want violence? Like, I mean, how do you talk to them about these things?
We do, and in those cases, I would talk to them probably afterwards, post-incident, as opposed to during the heat of whatever the incident was during the moment. But yes, I mean, myself and Park Patrol are all comfortable with having very frank conversations with them. I have not had to have those conversations to this point with them because I've been very happy with the degree of compassion and respect and dignity that I have seen them exercise at incidents that involve our parks or facilities. So, but yes, I would definitely want to have those conversations. If I thought anyone, whether it's a staff member or someone outside staff, I would want to have those conversations.
Well, I really appreciate your willingness to have these conversations, and I know that we are in a time where critical reflection of our work, it has to be done, and we have to have the tough conversations. So I imagine these conversations will continue. Maybe they won't happen at the big board meeting level, but they will continue. So I really appreciate it, and I appreciate staff's willingness to continue to ask critical questions of ourselves and of each other.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you, Mark, for all this information. Thank you, Lulu, as well. You know, one of the reasons why we asked to have this conversation is that we're not exempt, right? I'm so grateful to hear that Park Patrol leads with that ambassador mentality, leads with compassion. But it was really important for us to feel like we could, you know, feel like we're informed and know that we have good practices within our own house, and where we have relationships with other jurisdictions, we're influencing them where we can too, right? So this was really, really helpful for me and gives me peace of mind. It wasn't an area of concern, but it definitely, you know, when George Floyd was murdered, I hope it gave everyone pause to say, hey, we're not exempt from the conversation. So thank you for coming with so much information. I think our board is eager for data, so where it fits into your practices, you know, if there's reports you can share with us, I'm sure the board would love that as a follow-up. And I think my only other question is about the ambassador program. I know that wasn't really the context of today's conversation, but knowing how helpful they are to eyes in the park of people that care, is that something where you are also in partnership with the ambassador program, where Park Patrol and ambassador program work together?
Yes, because since they predominantly work in what we would term either high call areas or high complaint areas, as well as the nature parks. I work with Bruce, and we kind of work together to facilitate what they do, how they do things, get them trained properly, those things.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Just double check. I took so many notes. This is really, really insightful for me today. So, and again, I've called Park Patrol here and there, and every time they've been so professional and helpful, and I'm really grateful. And I'm grateful for your leadership. It was really helpful to hear about how we interact with the homeless. I think that our homeless population are in a really tough spot, and I'm grateful to hear that we offer respite and we offer compassion and we offer resources where we can. So thank you. Do any of my colleagues have any other comments?
I have one real quick,
yes.
I know that within the Nature and Trails Advisory Committee, that Park Patrol and houseless folks and the safety and security of our trail system has been a constant conversation. And I know, thank you, Mark, your team has, you know, shared information, and Bruce has shared information with that advisory committee. So these questions are coming up from our own advisory committee volunteers as well. So thank you for sharing what you have with us, as I think we hit you up really early on as you started in the district. So thank you for that.
I'm happy to come back and speak with you guys anytime.
We'll probably take you up on it. Felicia, yes.
I just forgot to say thank you to Lulu and the team over there. I love the message garden. I'm so excited about the walls. It just so aligns with our values, and there's art, and it's everything we love, and I love it. So thank you to the team who thought of that, who's implementing it. I put my rock there. I hope there's even more now, so thank you.
Not to brag, but my rocks made the presentation, and I feel really special. Okay, well, that is it for our agenda tonight. Thank you for staying later than we were scheduled, but this conversation was so important, and I feel like it was really rich. So thank you so much. Looking so good in that THPRD mask, Mark.
Well, I'm in my office, so you know what's required.
Yep, well, good on you. So thank you so much, everyone, and we are adjourned, so have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.